everybody to this evening with Robert Frost. I'm Anna Battigelli, English Department Chair at SUNY Plattsburgh, and with me is my colleague, Dr. Ron Davis, a professor in our Department of Journalism and Public Relations. Tonight, we will listen to a recording of the 1959 poetry reading at SUNY Plattsburgh by the iconic American poet Robert Frost. Frost visited our college at the height of his fame, having won 4 Pulitzer Prizes, published over 20 volumes of poetry, won many of the 40 honorary degrees awarded him, and drawn audiences throughout the country at his readings. Like Mark Twain before him, he became a national icon. He was so popular with the American public that shortly after this reading at Plattsburgh, he was awarded a Congressional Gold Medal and invited to read at the inauguration of President John F. Kennedy. His popular readings at college campuses were always chatty. He talked broadly and humorously about poetry, politics, teaching, character, rhyme, and so forth before launching into a poem. His conversation with the audience highlights the speaking voices created within his poems. As one critic put it, Frost never recited his poems, he said them. "Would you like to hear me say that one again?" he would ask. He wanted his poems to talk to us, and they do. We have divided Frost's readings into 4 sections. The first section focuses on teaching, the second examines tone, then Frost considers poetic form. Finally, he discusses metaphor. His poems always sound conversational, as if we are hearing the familiar voice of a friend sharing observations or telling a story. But attention to his interest in form reveals the carefully crafted nature of his poems. Before we get started, we would like to thank Professor Tim Clukey, who digitized the tape, Jack Downs, our technical producer and editor, and Debra Kimok, Director of Special Collections at Feinberg Library, who made the tape available to us. We will have time for questions and comments after the reading. Most important, I want to thank Ron Davis, who found the tape and saw to it that it was preserved. Robert Frost's reading at SUNY Plattsburgh is a special part of the college's heritage, and it is thanks to Professor Davis that we can now experience an evening with Robert Frost.
Frost was a frequent visitor to Plattsburgh, dating back to 1945. He stayed at the homes of local residents, including Doc Redkay and John P. Myers, both having campus buildings named after them. He had a campus office, and he loved Lake Champlain and the Adirondacks. However, he was not a fan of formal education. It was a burr that stuck to his coat. He never earned a higher education degree. Failing to finish his first semester at Dartmouth, he left, he said, so he could be educated, and he lasted only 2 years at Harvard. Yet he was a teacher for more than 50 years, first at 2 New Hampshire schools before moving to England in 1912 and gambling on a career as a poet. From 1916 till his death in 1963, he was a writer in residence or visiting professor at the University of Michigan, Amherst, Dartmouth, Harvard, and the Breadloaf School of English. In his 1959 talk at SUNY Plattsburgh, he was speaking mainly to teachers. Many of his comments relate to teaching.
Fellow writers sometimes worry about me for the reason that I am a teacher. They're afraid teaching would hurt my poetry. You may not have heard that, but it gets written about. And what's the worry chiefly, I wonder? I think it's theme papers. But they don't know how wily I am, how I read theme papers. I'm a very rapid reader. I'm the rapidest reader alive. I set a book on the shelf and look at its spine for a long time before I look inside of it to see if I've guessed right about what's in it. doesn't take many pages to settle that with most books. Something else you might be interested in is teaching. You wonder how much you ought to excite people to writing poetry, whether you ought to start children writing poetry, and how soon can you start them writing poetry, and why should you start them writing poetry? Well, maybe you start them writing poetry so as to get over it young. Get sick of it before they get coming around where I am. The last 3 days I've been spoken to in public places by pleasant ladies, husband with them, and everything all right, and and what it led up to was they wanted to send me some poems. And furthermore, they hoped I'd deliver an opinion on them. And I said, no, you can send them to me, but I do nothing about it. I'll read them. And if they really knock me over backward, you'll probably hear from me. The writing of children is your problem, my problem, young people all the time. I've come to a point with some grown-up boys in college reading their poems off and on, where I was afraid that just holding their poems in my hand might commit them to a career of a vain career of trying to be poets. And I remember saying to one boy, he handed me another bundle of poems, and I held them a minute, and I said, Green, do you mean it? He said, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. I said, then I can read the blasted stuff. I was thinking how many educational things have crept into my poems, some from being farmers, some from just being a human being, and some from being a teacher, all sorts of things like that. For instance, I'm going to say to you the Mending Wall poem. And in that there's a line that I never would have put in if I had never been a teacher. Hadn't been a troubled teacher, see, a troubled one. I'll speak it. I won't speak, but see if you catch it. No, you won't catch it until I point out, but I'll point out. This, see, I don't need, I know it by heart. And this was a regular farm job. Every year, in the spring of the year, a little earlier than this, first thing we did was get together with our neighbor and restore the stone wall between our farms for no earthly use except it was a custom. We'd ceased to try to keep cows in that way, and everybody was beginning to use barbed wire anyway, but we set the wall up again every year. It fell down every winter. We set it up every spring. And it was a regular thing. And I say I let my neighbor know beyond the hill. As a matter of fact, he let me know usually. He was more punctilious about it than I was. And here we were at it. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at springtime, mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we work, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves and some so nearly balls we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. That's about as long as they stay, till our backs are turned. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on the side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say else to him, but it's not else exactly, and I'd rather he'd say it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage arm. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only, in the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. See? And you can see that's a very figurative thing. You can take it a lot of ways. But the line that I got out of being a teacher is, I'd rather he said it for himself. All years I've ached that some of the students would say something for themselves that I didn't put into their heads. I used to think, I'm going to a class today. See, I say to somebody, I'm going to class today, I'm going to just get there and sit to see if somebody won't say something of his own accord, and sit. And every time I got embarrassed and I was the first speaker, they didn't seem to be embarrassed at all. There I waited for somebody to say something great and original. Nobody said a lame word. What's the matter with them? Well, you're just in the same predicament I'm in, you're teaching. Every day as I walked to them, walked toward a class, went up the hill to class, every day a kind of an animus got up in me, to do something to them. Not to just say something to them, but do something to them. And when the animus was strong enough, I often had a pretty good time. I taught not with inspiration, but with animus. Animus. And some of these go way, way back before my teaching, but that line's right out of my teaching, and there are other lines just the same that I think that's the heart of it all. If I could only get somebody to say something, in my classes that surprised me, Just doesn't need to be a big, great thing like the theory of evolution, for instance, that Darwin only, that occurred to him when he was seasick. He was on the voyage, on that voyage of Beagle, and nothing ever occurred to him afterward. He just went on proving that all the rest of his life. But he had that little idea, and that's been so big in the world. But one more, not quite as easy to say and get on the first hearing. A speck that would have been beneath my sight on any but a paper sheet so white set off across what I had written there, and I had idly poised my pen in air to stop it with a period of ink when something strange about it made me think. This was no dust speck by my breathing blown, but unmistakably a living mite with inclinations it could call its own. It paused as with suspicion of my pen, and then came racing wildly on again to where my manuscript was not yet dry, then paused again, and either drank or smelt with loathing, for again it turned to fly, plainly with an intelligence I dealt. It seemed too tiny to have room for feet, yet must have had a set of them complete to express how much it didn't want to die. It ran with terror and with cunning crept. It faltered. I could see it hesitate. Then in the middle of the open sheet, cower down in desperation to accept whatever I accorded it of fate. I have none of the tenderer than thou collectivistic regimenting love with which the modern world is being swept. But this poor microscopic item now, since it was nothing I knew evil of, I let it lie there till I hope it slept. I have a mind myself, and recognize mind when I meet with it in any guise. No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mind. And that comes back to it again. Do you know where I got that? No one can know how glad I am to find on any sheet the least display of mine. Reading theme papers.
All the fun is in how you say a thing, Frost said. Almost all of Frost's poems are experiments in tones of voice, in ways of saying a thing. He tried to capture the cadences of New Englanders talking and the intonations of everyday conversation. The sound you hear of people talking in another room when you cannot hear their words. When literature comes alive, it speaks, Frost said. Good writing is good speaking caught alive. He called his poems talk songs. In his talk poems, Frost creates living sentences by marrying the tones of everyday conversation to idiom, syntax, meaning, and the unstressed stress pattern of English speech. Good readers recreate those living sentences only through their previous conversational experience. You can't read a single good sentence with a salt in it, Frost said, unless you have previously heard it spoken. Everything written, Frost explains, is as good as it is dramatic. But the drama in Frost's poems comes not from body movements, postures, or facial expressions, but through the reader's voice. Like the poet, readers must be performers. They must internalize the experience of the poem, and through vocal gestures and sound postures, Frost said, recreate the sound sense in the poem. Frost created memorable voices and personas, the practical farmer of Mending Wall, who sees the absurdity of repairing the stone wall, but does it anyway. The traveler in stomping by woods on a snowy evening, tempted by dark woods, but obliged by duty. And the husband and wife in home burial, traumatized by the death of their firstborn, their relationship shattered, and their dialogue disconnected monologues. In this segment, Frost talks about the tone of voice in writing.
The greatest lack in all this reading that you do, these themes, is a kind of dismal tone they have. Of statement on statement on statement on statement without any of what I'm going to speak of. First is the words, the vocabulary, isn't there? Then there's the grammar, structure, and then there's the idea, and then after you've said all that, there's still something more that's very hard to describe. I've tried for years to get it. It's a dramatic tone in the sentences. That's the part that goes dead, first of all, in perfunctory writing. And you'll read pages and pages of themes without a live sentence in it. All correct and all that. And I found that I did better, never to correct anything, but to take an interest in the thought, and once in a while remark on, a little more life in these sentences would do me good, never mind you. The only free verse poem I ever wrote, I ought to say to you. A lady said to me, you've been saying all sorts of things, this out in California, president's wife or something. She said to me, you've been saying all sorts of things tonight. Which are you, conservative or radical? And I said, looked her right in the eyes, and I said, I never dared be radical when young, for fear it would make me conservative when old. I left her hanging up there in California, in suspense. And then you want to hear a dreadful one? Well, turn on another voice, entirely almost. This is called provide, see? We don't have to say that to the Americans anymore because it's all taken care of. Your government provides for you. But this is an old-fashioned poem again, you see. I told a young cousin of mine, cousin of my grandson's, that my grandson had just gone to work for the government in Washington. I told him why he can retire, he said, at 49. That's the first thing he thought about, retiring. The last thing I think about. I'm going to retire. Going to write my autobiography when I retire. Find something to do. Provide, provide. And I might tell you, there'd been a strike that this is a memory of a strike at Harvard College for the scrub women. The boys struck, the whole college struck, and they got a raise in their wages. And the leader of that strike is a rather well-known, what shall I call him? I don't want to get arrested. But he's a rather well-known communist. The last time I met him, I said to him, congratulations. He's a big, strong fellow. And I said, congratulations. He said, for what? I said, for being out of jail. He's quite a friend of mine with all this, you know. But he led that strike, a successful strike. And he went on to try to lead the world, I think, down the same road. World strike or something like that. But now I leave that. These women I was thinking of. The witch that came, the withered hag, to wash the steps with pail and rag, was once the beauty of the shag, the picture pride of Hollywood. Too many fall from great and good for you to doubt the likelihood. Die early and avoid the fate. Or if predestined to die late, make up your mind to die in state. Make the whole stock exchange your own. If need be, occupy a throne. Monaco, you know. So where nobody can call you crone. Some have relied on what they knew, others on being simply true. What worked for them might work for you. No memory of having starred makes up for later disregard or keeps the end from being hard. Better to go down dignified with boughten friendship at your side than none at all. Provide, provide. You see? That's nice. A governor of a state came to see me about that and said I shouldn't have written it. So it's a wicked poem. He was a professor too, teacher, poet too. He was governor of state, I won't say what state for a while. And he came to see me and he said, you shouldn't have written that, Robert. And you see, he was extreme case of New Deal, good man, fine man, but New Deal, great one. And he said, I said, why? I provided for you in it. This line, some have relied on what they knew. That's professor. You see, others on being simply true. That's the professor's wife. That worked for them might work for you, I said, see? I gave that outlet, see? I hadn't thought of him, but I pretended that I had him. But you see now, look how I enjoy that, reveling in those tones, you know. I like that so much. The first time I said it was in Washington, very prominent man in front of me. And he became a friend of mine, quite a friend afterward. He was sitting down there, still a friend. And when I got through, I said, better to go down dignified with boughten friendship at your side than none at all. Provide, provide. And then I said, somebody else will provide for you. See, going on with the tone, making it worse and worse. And how will you like that? That's outside the poem.
Frost was a formalist at a time when most poets dismissed formal rhyme and meter and opted for free verse. He viewed the requirements of poetic form almost as if they were a physical challenge. When asked which college department was closest to poetry, he responded, athletics, explaining that, quote, poetry I regard as a kind of prowess in performance, end quote. Part of that performative prowess is his success in creating speaking voices. As he put it, quote, if my poems were talking poems, if to read one of them you heard a voice, that would be to my liking, end quote. Frost fits the rhythms, words, and pacing of everyday speech into carefully crafted lines of poetic meter. He uses stanzaic structures. he often rhymes. The tension between poetic form and the more random speech sounds of conversation produces the music of his poetry. It's what gives his poems that satisfying feeling of completion, their epigrammatic punch, their volcanic emotional power, their whimsy, and their tragic tone. Much of his poetry is, like Mending Wall, in iambic pentameter. He wrote 29 sonnets. You have heard his rhymed triplets in Provide, Provide. As he reads his poem Departmental later in this next section, listen to the rhymed couplets. Note how, despite Frost's humorous emphasis on the rhymes, the poem retains a playful solemnity about the natural phenomenon he depicts.
You know, one of the things that made me trouble was my saying years ago that I'd as soon write free verse as play tennis with the net down. See, I'm a formal person. I like lines and nets and things like that. But what do we have rhyme for? Some of my friends have given it up. When you're making a poem, I want the symbol of it to be the little rhymes that give me the sense of doubling that way. Clukey. I think I've never thought that out until lately. Why did I like it so? Why do I like couplets so? Little separate couplets. If you hear me reciting, you might notice that I'm particularly pleased with myself when I'm doing a pretty little couplet. So all that lies in it, this doubling of things. It makes me out a regular matchmaker, both in the thought and in the form. You'd be mad at me if I didn't say some of the things of mine that are around. Suppose I say a little one first. Say a couplet first, 1, 2 couplets. Just my pleasure in it. We dance, this is as if it said ring around the rosy almost. We dance round in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. And then another one. Forgive, O Lord, my little joke's on thee, and I'll forgive thy great big one on me. Well, then there's this one. This is about an ant, and I've said it every time I've been here. Called Departmental. An ant on the tablecloth ran into a dormant moth of many times his size. You see, this is a fine one to do the meter of and the rhyming of. The rhymes are close together, the lines are short, and they beat right off like this. An ant on the tablecloth ran into a dormant moth. You see, cloth moth, and that began the poem. And then it keeps up that way, and you got to watch it and see if the rhymes decide me what to say next, or whether I said what I intended. Watch it. An ant on the tablecloth ran into a dormant moth of many times his size. I'll emphasize the rhymes. He showed not the least surprise. His business wasn't with such. He gave it scarcely a touch and was off on his duty run. But if he encountered one of the hive's inquiry squad, whose work is to find out God and the nature of time and space, he would put him on to the case. Ants are a curious race. One crossing with hurried tread the body of one of their dead isn't given a moment's arrest, seems not even impressed. But he no doubt reports to any with whom he crosses antennae, and those they no doubt report to the higher up at court. Then word goes forth in formic. That's that acid language that critics use. Then word goes forth in formic. Death's come to Jerry McCormick, our selfless forager Jerry. Will the special Janizary, whose office it is to bury the dead of the commissary, go bring him home to his people, lay him in state on a steeple, wrap him for shroud in a petal, embalm him with ichor of nettle. This is the word of your queen, and presently on the scene appears a solemn mortician, and taking formal position with feelers calmly a-twiddle, seizes the dead by the middle, and heaving him high in air, carries him out of there. No one stands round to stare, 'tis nobody else's affair. It couldn't be called ungentle, but how thoroughly departmental.
In this segment, Frost talks about what he considered to be the heart of all creative thought and poetry, metaphor, saying one thing in terms of another. A poem begins in delight, he says, and ends in wisdom. It begins with a vague intuition, a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a lovesickness, and it ends in a clarification of life. Not necessarily a great clarification, Frost said, such as sex and cults are founded on, but a momentary stay against confusion. This clarification of life, Frost hides in metaphors: the road not taken, the woods that are lovely, dark, and deep, and the promises we keep, a universe that may end in fire or ice, people along a beach that look one way, but cannot look out far nor in deep, a white moth trapped by a white spider on a white flower. These metaphors about the human condition, Frost calls parables, then impishly adds, so the wrong people will not understand and so be saved. Why did Frost write in formal verse when other poets turn to free verse? Why are his poems metaphors for states of mind and life situations? My theory is the discipline and detachment that formal verse and metaphors require were the safety net for his body and soul scars, the depression and grief that plagued his life. 4 of Frost's 6 children died before he did, including his firstborn at 4. His mother and sister were in a mental hospital, and his relationship with his wife fractured. As she was dying in 1938, Frost went up the stairs and down the stairs outside her room, hoping to be admitted, but she never called him in. 2 years later, his oldest son committed suicide with a shotgun. Except for one poem, Frost did not, perhaps could not, write directly about his great griefs, about being acquainted with the night. Rather, he wrote about the desert places that haunted his mind through metaphor, through indirections and hints. I think Frost's poems were his momentary stay against confusion.
The thought in all poems, the base of thought, is metaphor, bringing two things together to your pleasure, surprise, and to your enlightenment. You know, meaning that, like that, I say I'd as soon play tennis. I'd as soon write free verse as play tennis with the net down. See, I brought free verse and tennis together. And nearly all our thinking is like that. I say that some of the new politics, Karl Marx's politics that you've heard of, maybe, is an attempt to so homogenize society that the cream would never rise again. And that brings, that metaphor, you see, it's just a metaphor, two things brought together. Now that is the heart of all thinking. I leave that, I could go into that more, I have in times. That the heart of all thinking is metaphor. Two things brought together that click and have significance. And you say an orange is like an apple, that doesn't mean anything. See, but you get something with wit in it. I don't know what it is, but it's generative. You go on thinking from it, and all the thinking of the world is like that. Just take a great philosopher like Plato, for instance, and Plato just used one metaphor, that the whole universe may be likened unto what? That in man that we call reason. That's the whole of Plato. And Take another philosopher, his name was Schopenhauer, and he said that the whole universe may be likened unto that in man which is called will. That's all. You can go through the philosophers that way, and you find that they cling to one great metaphor. Many minor metaphors within the writing and thinking. Then another one about my politics. Indirectly, you have to go and say which way I'm going to vote next time, and so on. You wish you knew, don't you? See the tone I say that in. See, this is the way we talk to each other, you know. You wish you knew, don't you? You know. See, that wants to get into the poetry, all that, into it. This is called the objection to being stepped on. This is an offhand one. This is for people that know the difference between a rake and a hoe. I never know, you know. You don't know what you got to go on, where people have been, what their education is, what they read, whether they've read any Sanskrit or not. I don't trade on my Sanskrit at all. I know a friend of mine does. I don't. But you got to, you know. I'm not interested in the common man particularly, but still, you know, you got to consider that most people haven't had Sanskrit. This is the objection to being stepped on. At the end of the row, I stepped on the toe of an unemployed hoe. It rose in offense and struck me a blow in the seat of my sense. It wasn't to blame, but I called it a name, and I must say it dealt me a blow that I felt like malice prepense. You may call me a fool, but was there a rule the weapon should be turned into a tool? You know? And what do we see? The first tool I step on turned into a weapon. See that rhyme? But you see, that's deep, that is. That's my politics. If you think that out, part of my politics.
Frost was a devoted father. He had his dark side, struggling with depression and illness and life challenges, and many of his poems present an unflinchingly tragic sensibility. But he also loved his children and delighted in playing with them, thought deeply about their education, and took them on many nature hikes. His biography charts his many visits to his adult children and his consistent support of them. We thought we would leave you with his playful comments on poetry for children and with a poem he wrote for his daughter when she was a child. It's called The Last Word of a Bluebird.
This question of poetry for children is always coming up. Let me just linger over that a minute. I meet parents who say, my 3-year-old child loves to hear me read Milton before she goes to sleep. And that's the theory that vowels and consonants are soothing. And that's bunk, you know. And it's a bad beginning. Some people that are brought up that way never get over it. They think the whole thing is vowels and consonants. And of course, it's something more than that. It's this thing I call last of all, this tone of voice that goes with the meaning. And the only, I might say if I wanted to, that the only use for meaning is that it guides me in the tone of voice. But you got to have meaning. And some people go off on a tangent there and dry the whole subject up with just nothing but meaning, that no tones go with it. It's a thought-felt thing, a combination of thought and feeling, of course, the poetry is, and so is the prose by rights. I say, for a definition of poetry, it is that which is lost out of both prose and verse in translation. I wrote this for one of my children years ago, It's called the Bluebird. I think I called it the Bluebird to Leslie, my daughter, little girl she was. As I went out, a crow in the dooryard said, "Oh, I was looking for you. How do you do? I just stopped to tell Leslie, will you, that her little bluebird wanted me to bring word that the north wind last night that made the stars bright, made ice on the trough, almost made him cough his little tail off. He just had to fly, but he sent her goodbye, and he told her be good and wear a red hood and hunt for skunk tracks in the snow with an axe, and perhaps in the spring he'd be back and sing." That's a childlike thing, and with all, even to the absurdity of hunt for skunk tracks in the snow with an axe, the one thing you don't do with a skunk. I once said to a class in Plymouth, New Hampshire, Teachers College, when I was there, I taught there a year. I'm in the books about, it's in the who's who that I did. I remember saying to him one day that there are beautiful books that I handle, and those come first with me. Then comes me. First of all, I wouldn't do anything to hurt the great poems. I wouldn't linger over them in any way to hurt them. And of course, that's one of the questions, what you'll do to them, whether you treat them as the doctor on the operating table, or whether you fall in love with them. It's two different things.
This concludes our Frost recording. For decades, our college's forensic team breathed life into Frost poems through dramatic readings. My wife, Nora Montanera Davis, a Plattsburgh alum, faculty emeritus, and award-winning dramatic reader, will perform dramatic interpretations of Frost poetry live on campus. Our Frost Alive event will include some of the Frost recordings. Robert Frost is part of our campus history and Plattsburgh family. If anyone watching has local Frost connections to share with Nora, please reach out to me, and Nora will be delighted to hear from you. At this time, Ann and I welcome comments and questions.
You should be able to unmute yourself to speak. I have a question for you, Ron, about the last thing Frost says while we're waiting for other questions.
Okay.
When he seems to be describing the difference between analyzing a poem and falling in love with it. And I'm interested in what he means by falling in love with a poem. Do you have a take on that?
Well, Frost always felt that a poem came from what he called vague inclinations. It came from feelings, and it was organic. It was like a plant growing from a sprout. It determined its own form. He said it fulfilled its own destiny. It's not something you could think out ahead of time. If you did, you couldn't write the poem. It's not something you could analyze. And so I think what he's trying to say is that a poem is something that you have to feel, you have to internalize. It's not something that you think about and try to analyze.
It's really something you experience.
It's an experience, right?
Got it.
Does anyone have any comments? Anyone have any questions? We really have enjoyed and appreciate you coming to hear Frost. Any thoughts, comments?
Paul is saying a message. Allowed to unmute. You should be allowed to unmute at this point.
Okay. Is anyone having trouble
Oh, here we
unmuting?
go.
Okay.
Now what, does it work?
Yes, now it
Thanks.
works.
Unmuted. Yeah.
So I would love to thank you. So this is
yeah.
so special
There we go.
and absolutely amazing. I graduated from Plattsburgh in 73 and 74. I had Dr. Redkay as an instructor, and there were rumors that his good friend was Robert Frost. And we used to laugh about it because, of course, Robert Frost, I mean, he must have died years ago. Are you kidding me? So we thought it was a joke. And when up until the time your wonderful email came out about this evening, I have been in touch with all of my sorority sisters who were English majors, and we have gotten such a kick out of this thinking, oh my gosh, it was true all that time. But this is so special. I actually was teaching a class tonight and I canceled it. And I said, I'm going to spend the evening with Robert Frost, see if you can top that. So I really thank you. I think it's amazing that you found this.
Yes. it's
And how
wonderful.
special that you get to share it with us.
Thank you so much. I graduated in 55.
I agree.
And during that year, there was a tea for some of us students with Robert Frost. I will never, ever forget it. It was a wonderful experience. And this brings it back. I was so thrilled to see this tonight. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Oh,
Elizabeth,
I'm jealous.
do you mind if I put you in contact with Nora? Because in her reading, she wants to talk about local connections and anyone who has memories of Robert Frost.
Well, I have memories of that event, a tea with Robert Frost.
Wow.
Back in the 50s. It was 1955, I believe, my last year there.
Wow.
It's a wonderful experience. Wonderful.
Do you remember his connection to the campus at the time? Did he just come in for that tea, or was he around on campus?
I don't remember the specifics
Okay.
like that. That was a long time ago.
Okay.
But I do remember him and that having tea there.
Yeah.
Great. And he used to visit Dr. Redkay, and Redkay lived on the point at Cumberland Head across the road from my aunt and uncle. So I used to see a lot of the activities that were going on over there. They had a lot of grand parties.
Those really good stories. Wow. Well, I too, Mary Mitchell, I'm class of 67, school nurse teacher, education, and I did take English in my senior year. It was awesome. And that professor as well, you know, my love of poetry really started at Plattsburgh. And I always read Robert Frost. If I teach at a Live Strong program, which is for cancer survivors in the YMCA, where I am, and they're graduating next Thursday, and I will read Two Roads Diverged in the Wood that night, and I will have to read it with even more emotion than I normally do now. So thank you again. It was quite a privilege to hear, and what a humorous and just, you know, the recording just make him alive to us. I've only seen like still pictures of him and etc. So again, I thank you very much. It was a thrill.
Really was.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Helen Schwartzstone, and I was 69, graduate of Plattsburgh. My husband and I met there, and we spent a lovely afternoon with Doc and Lillian at their home. So for me, it was just a moment to think about that Frost had been a close friend and had been there as well. I took a leadership class with Dr. Redkay many years ago. And though I wasn't aware of his relationship with Frost, some of Frost's work has been some of my favorite throughout the years. So thank you for doing the program.
Are there any missing any other tape recordings in the archives hiding?
Unfortunately, there was. They disappeared from the special collections. And when I came here, it was still in the special collections, one of the tapes, and I recorded from that tape to play in my class. I had a poetry class, and that's what we heard from that was from my tape of the disappeared tapes that we really had at the library.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, maybe.
And I need to say that, Tim Clukey, who digitized from my reel-to-reel tape, did such a wonderful job. The sound went up and down in the reel-to-reel tape. It had hisses, it had pops. He did a wonderful job in preparing it for us.
Wow. It was like you were with him.
Yeah.
I want to jump in, Ron, to follow up on what you just said, to thank both Jack and Tim for their contribution to this evening. You and Anna, we get to see and get to hear your thoughts, but yeah, Jack and Tim are the ones who made this work, and I think it's really terrific, and so thanks to them.
We would have been lost without them. This event would not have happened without Jack and Tim.
How can I get on to say something? Click on.
We can hear you. You can say, just talk.
It has a line through it. Click on it.
It will.
Disappear.
Perhaps there's hope though for something being returned. It's escaping me at the minute, but just recently in the last 2 weeks or so, some incredible documents that were they in Harvard's library? They've been missing for years, and then people kind of forgot about it, and then it just happened. Someone left it outside the library door. There were 3 documents and left a note to the librarian, "Happy Easter, XO." But there's some famous things that were missing, and I can't think of
These were notebooks of Darwin's. Speaking of his getting seasick on the Beagle, it was his notebooks from the Beagle.
Oh, well,
And I think
thank
it
you
was
for
in
filling
one
in
book.
my gap. But here's Mr. Frost spoke about him and humor and told us. And was he doing a metaphor about that he developed the theory when he was nauseous on a ship? Oh my gosh! So thank you. Oh, they were Darwin's. Yeah. So they just like appeared, and they've been gone for, I don't know, 50 years or something crazy. So you never know. Should put something in the Plattsburgh Press looking for missing Frost tape.
Dr. Davis, hi, Richard Denmark here, 82.
Yes, I remember. How are you doing?
Good. Glad to see you. You did a great job tonight. And I wanted to know if you could express what you thought when you found the tape and what you intended to do with it, the tape or tapes, and just what was going through your thought process at the time and up till through now with the tapes.
Okay. Well, I was as excited as we were tonight to hear Frost hear his own voice, and I had no idea those tapes were going to disappear, so I assumed that they were always going to be there. I was just really glad to share the poems in my class. I remember one of the students, Mark Mastrian, who is still at the college, getting so excited over hearing Robert Frost. And so it was wonderful to find out that there was a Plattsburgh connection, and it was wonderful to hear him in person, because I think, as we all experienced tonight, he really comes alive. It feels that he's really right in front of us talking.
Absolutely. Will the presentation that your wife you spoke to be live on the campus? Will it be recorded? Would like alumnus like us have an opportunity to see it if we're not in the Peaburg area?
I'll have to talk with her, but I would think that she would try to record it if possible.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted it live because it has so much more impact when you're working, speaking to an audience. But I will relay that interest of yours in having it recorded.
Well, thank you. But will the alumni get an email at least to tell us perhaps when it is live or when it'll be on the campus? Maybe get in the car. It only takes me 4 hours to get there.
Definitely, we will let everybody know to the alumni office.
All right, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Grace Neal, and I remember Mr. Frost coming to class at Plattsburgh. He always came over to Dr. Noy's class, an English professor, and he would come and read to us for a short period of time.
Wow.
And whenever I had Dr. Noyes for an English class during that year, sometime he would come over and speak and read.
Wow, Dr. Noyes, that sounds familiar to me. Wow, so you were in his presence.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Did he have a suit on like he did in the photographs that we saw? Did he have a suit and tie on?
Pretty much, but sometimes the tie came off.
What time of the year was it? You recall?
Well, he could come over either in the spring or fall.
Wow, what a treat.
Mhm.
Yeesh.
Yeah, and we knew it was even back then.
Yes, wow, 59. Yeah,
57, yeah.
57, excuse me.
Of course, that would have been, I had never had him my senior year, so it must have been 55, 56 when he was there.
Oh, matching the tea party, perhaps the same time frame.
Yes,
Yeah.
probably so.
Well, you know, it brings out how frequent his visits were. This was 1959 for the recording. There was another recording in 1958, and now we're talking about 1957 and 1955. I did see a book that Frost autographed in 1945 that indicated that he was on campus then. So he was here for many semesters then.
I never heard about it when I was there.
Really?
Kept secret.
Did Plattsburgh ever give him an honorary doctorate?
No, it didn't. Anna probably knows more about the honorary doctorates than I did. He received more than 40 awards. I know that at least one of them, I think it was from Harvard, was an honorary doctorate. Were there others, Anna, that you know of?
I don't know the specifics, and I certainly don't know anything about the Plattsburgh, whether they ever considered that or not. I think they might not have thought that was in their purview. But I mean, there's so much more to discover. I mean, someone said just a few moments ago that this was all hidden. And I guess my fear is how easy it is to forget history. You know, if Ron had not preserved this tape, we would maybe know these little bits and pieces, but it wouldn't be quite the same thing. So it reminds us how important it is to preserve, history, to preserve artifacts like the tape and keep them updated so that they can be performed on modern, devices.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I wonder if it's a coincidence that the reel-to-reel tapes disappeared. I mean, were they just thrown away because they were reel-to-reel tapes? I mean, I think that's a possibility. Because we can be so careless about these technological, progressions. Okay, that I can't get to, but yeah. Are there other questions? This is so interesting to hear firsthand accounts. Ron, I think when you and Nora get this, or when Nora gets her reading organized and so forth, I hope you'll send out advertise it broadly so that we can come back and hear more Frost and perhaps combine our little bits and pieces that we have of his relationship with the campus and learn more.
When I mentioned to Nora that about home burial, because I made a reference to it tonight, she recited immediately from heart home burial, which is over 9 minutes long. And it had so much feeling, and his poems come alive. They were meant to be spoken and created, to come alive through the human voice. So yes, we would definitely get in touch with everyone when we have this set up, and let them know about it.
Mhm. Super. Sure. Any closing comments before we all leave?
I could just say a couple of words. This is Jeremy Slosser. I'm in the Villages in Florida, a friend of Helen Doan who spoke earlier. So I have no connection with any of the rest of you, but I'm just delighted that I was able to listen in to the conversations and spend an evening with Mr. Frost as well. That was very, very nice. And I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, with that kind note, I just want to thank you all for being part of this. Thank again, Jack and Tim Clukey, and most of all, thank Ron Davis for having preserved this very important part of our history.
And thank Anna, because this would not have happened without Anna initiating it. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah,
Thank
we have to
you.
do like this.
I look forward to part 2, whenever that happens, when Nora gets that underway.
Okay.
Anna and Ron, I do have one. What biography would you recommend? There must be more than several, probably, but is there any one that you feel is a better read than another? Not his poems, but a biography of him. Someone may have written, or he may joke about his autobiography.
Right. Do you want to take that, Ron, or do you have strong feelings?
No, or would you like to?
Well, I think when you get to the question of autobiography, you get to the question of which Frost is the real Frost, because the autobiographies really differ. So if you want the dark, deeply troubled Frost, there's his name is escaping me suddenly.
Lawrence Thompson.
Thank you, Lawrence Thompson's biography that portrays him actually as menacing and slightly monstrous. The biography that I might prefer to that, though I think you keep them in dialogue, is Jay Perini's more recent biography, which depicts Frost, the devoted husband, father, and so forth. I don't think that one negates the other. It's just interesting to me how different the depictions of Frost are in each. So then there might be others out there. I'm not a Frost scholar.
Thank you so much again.
Good. And thank you very much tonight for being part of this event.
Thank you all. Okay.
Good night.
Bye.